The brass bell above the kitchen door rings once, twice, then thrice, sharp and metallic, slicing through the hush of dawn. You startle awake on a mattress of straw and chill, your limbs aching from yesterday's labours. The frost clings to the stone floor like a second skin. Your breath clouds before you. Somewhere above, far above, someone stirs in feathered warmth, waiting for their tea, waiting for you. There are no clocks in your world, only the rhythms of other people's comfort. And as your fingers fumble with cold iron latches, and your apron strings knot against your ribs, you wonder, will anyone ever ring a bell for you? If this story chills your heart or stirs your soul, tell me, could you have endured such silence, such servitude? Share your thoughts, subscribe for more forgotten lives, and let this quiet history lull you towards sleep and deeper empathy. The bell rang once in the darkness, faint and deliberate, like a finger tapping on glass from the other side of the world. You felt it more than heard it. Not with your ears, but with your ribs, with the ache in your shoulder, with the small panic that rose in your chest before your eyes even opened. It was still night, though the word no longer held meaning. Night, day, those were for the drawing rooms above. For those who measured their lives in hours of leisure, down here you counted life in soot stains and cracked knuckles. The stone beneath your feet was cruel with cold, a cold that had spent the night nesting in every joint and garment. You rose from your mattress, if you could call it that, little more than straw stuffed in a potato sack, still damp from the dew your breath hadn't dried. Above you, the house still dreamed, but it would wake soon. And when it did, it would want everything at once. The smell in the corridor was old wood, coal dust, damp brick. You had grown to know it more intimately than your own skin. In the stillness before the scullery fires were lit, you walked softly, no heel, only toe. Even your silence had to be trained. In your hands, the match tin. In your throat, the hunger. If this quiet journey into forgotten footsteps stirs something in you, subscribe, share, or simply leave a candle of your thoughts below. What part of this story reminds you of a silence you've known? The house above was grand, a manor of many wings, with wisteria-wrapped columns and glass so clear it bent the sky. But that was not your world. You were born below the stairs, or rather, you entered life again when you passed beneath them. You had been here 3 weeks, just long enough to know how far the dining room was from the warming kitchen, long enough to know where the tiles dipped, and which ones sang when stepped upon, long enough to know that to exist in this house was to vanish from it. You were the newest. That meant the worst. The lowest. Not yet scullery maid, only girl. Not quite a footman, only boy. Still, you learned quickly. The morning began with coal. Always coal. You slipped through narrow passageways that the gentry would never find, corridors that twisted like veins behind walls, carrying labour in silence. The coal store was 2 turns past the larder and down 4 icy steps. It smelled of damp ash and rusted metal. Your fingers bled the first time you carried the bucket. No gloves. Those were for the butler, or perhaps the cook. Not for you. You gripped the iron handle until your palms cracked like river ice. By the time the fires crackled upstairs, their comfort had already burned through you. At 6, the bells began. They hung in a row in the servants' hallway, each one connected by wire to a room above. Some had names: morning room, east bedroom. Others had numbers. The bells danced when rung, a delicate chiming chaos, but the sound, however sweet, was a summons. You watched the others move when they rang. Eliza to the drawing room, Mrs. Hales to the parlour. You weren't yet trusted with a bell. Your job was to clean behind those who were. There was no time for food. You stole crusts when they were thrown out. The heel of a loaf, a peel of apple meant for the pigs. One day, you knew you would be allowed the leftovers from the servants' table. Until then, your hunger became a companion. A reminder. It quieted your complaints. It kept you obedient. The halls below the house were always dark. Lamps were not wasted on those who served. You learned to move by memory, counting doorways with your fingers. You learned the feel of limestone underfoot and the curve of the handrail carved in oak. One morning, you slipped. The tray you carried shattered. Blue china, delicate as breath. No one scolded you. They didn't need to. You swept the pieces silently, weeping only with your spine. The cook didn't look up. That night, You slept with your fingers bandaged in flour cloth, too afraid to cry, too tired to think. You had once dreamed of a world larger than this. A place with hills and orchards, and voices that called your name. But in this house you were called nothing. Sometimes, in your mind, you repeated your name like a hymn, just to remember the shape of it. The corridors behind the dining room were lined with portraits. You passed them each night, carrying water up to the bedrooms. None of those faces ever looked at you. Yet you knew their dust. You knew the spots behind their frames where mold grew in winter. Once, you paused before a mirror at the foot of the grand stair. A foolish mistake. You looked into it and saw someone else. A boy or girl, aged too fast. Eyes rimmed in fatigue. Skin dull, with soap and smoke. You didn't look long. There wasn't time. And mirrors, you'd learned, were dangerous things. They showed too much. The butler, Mr. Fenn, was the only voice you heard clearly. He spoke like a knife, being wiped clean. He moved without sound, tall and thin, and never flustered. He once told you, without turning his head, silence is your greatest virtue. Let the house forget you exist, and you'll do well. So you obeyed. You became steam. A hand opening a door before a knock. A napkin folded so finely it could weep. The upstairs people never noticed you. A few might glance. A child once asked your name. His mother said, "Don't ask questions. Servants don't have names." She smiled when she said it. At night, when the fires died and the bells fell still, you scrubbed the hearths. You swept the ashes. You wiped away the footprints of a day not yours. The house never truly slept. Not even then. It sighed through the rafters. It shifted with woodworm and old wind. The walls remembered footsteps, secrets, births, and debts, and you were now part of that memory, faint, but Before you lay down on the cold sack that was your bed, you placed your hands beneath your head, not for warmth, but to protect them from tomorrow. And in the last moments before sleep, you whispered your name again, just in case the house tried to take it. It began in your bones. Not the weather, but the cold itself. The kind that doesn't come from outside but rises from within stone and silence. It curled through your marrow, slithered beneath your skin, and wrapped itself around your joints like iron shackles soaked in river frost. You awoke before dawn, as always. But this morning even your breath felt brittle. You could see it leave you in small puffs, barely visible in the dim light of the corridor. The fire had gone out again. There was no time to warm your hands. The bells would ring soon, and the master's hearth must be lit before his slippers touched the floor. That was the rule, always the rule. You wrapped yourself in your woolen shawl, though it had grown threadbare from months of service. Holes the size of halfpennies dotted the fabric like stars in a pale night. Beneath it, your fingers fumbled with the latch of the coal scuttle. The metal bit into you with the same frozen spite as yesterday and the day before. There were no gloves. You had asked once. The cook laughed and told you to pray harder. The path to the coal shed lay through a narrow stone passage behind the kitchens, open to the yard. The wind knifed through your skirts, slicing the damp linen against your calves. The frost had crept down the walls overnight, tracing ivy-shaped scars into the brick. Every step echoed against frozen stone. Inside the shed, it was darker still. The pile of coal was dwindling, the black chunks already picked clean of the best pieces. You reached in with stiff fingers, feeling blindly, the dust painting your skin with the soot of other people's warmth. You carried the bucket back with both hands, arms straining, lungs burning. One misstep, and the entire load would tumble. You would have to start again. No one would help. No one ever did. By the time you reached the drawing room, your breath had caught in your throat like snowmelt choking a stream. The hearth sat silent, cold, disapproving. Its iron grate yawned like an empty mouth, waiting to be fed. You knelt. The ritual began. Paper first, twisted tightly like yesterday's sorrow, then kindling, snapped with numb fingers. Then, the coal, black and sharp. You struck the match. It flared once, weak and blue. You tried again. Finally, flame. The fire took, slowly, unwillingly. You coaxed it as if it were a frightened child, shielding it with your body. When it finally roared to life, you felt none of its heat. The warmth would climb the chimney and settle in the room above. in wool-lined chambers filled with velvet slippers and silk bedsheets. But not for you. Downstairs the cold returned. In the servants' corridor, breath still hung in the air like ghostly lace. You passed Agnes, the laundress, hauling steaming linens with arms scarred from scalding water. Her cheeks were already chapped, her apron wet. "Better than being still," she said. You weren't sure you believed her. You peeled potatoes beside a window that never closed properly. The wind whispered through the crack, like a secret you didn't want to hear. Your hands ached from the wet. Your skin split and bled. You kept working. Lunch passed. A scrap of crust, a ladle of thin broth. You stood as you ate, because there were not enough stools. Your shawl had stiffened where it had frozen earlier, and then thawed near the fire. It cracked when you bent. By mid-afternoon the house hummed. Upstairs, fires roared in every room. Curtains drawn, candles lit, music faint behind double doors. Downstairs the scullery was cold. The walls sweated with damp. The tiles beneath your feet were slick. One girl slipped last week and was sent away. Not because she was hurt, but because she screamed when she fell. That was not permitted. You learned, instead, to fall in silence. In the evening, you polished boots beside the back door. Snow had begun to fall, light and careless. It clung to the window panes like breath from a child's lips. You watched it for a moment, forgetting yourself. Then the bell rang. Drawing room. Tea service. You grabbed the tray, its silver edge, already iced from the air. You carried it up the narrow stair, careful not to let it rattle. If it clinked, the mistress would frown. That was worse than a scolding. She liked her tea hot, her scones warm. Her feet were tucked into fox fur slippers, one leg draped over the other like silk ribbon. She barely looked at you as you placed the tray on the table. You stepped back, hands folded, eyes lowered. The fire behind her crackled. Its glow painted the ceiling gold, and yet you stood in shadow. Later that night, as the house dozed in velvet and warmth, you crawled into your cot. It was no warmer than when you'd left it. The floor beneath you had not changed. It still stole your heat. The walls still whispered with wind. You wrapped your shawl around your shoulders and tucked your hands into your armpits. You counted breaths until you no longer could. In the space between one thought and the next, sleep took you. And in your dreams, you walked barefoot through summer fields, your hands clean, your name remembered, the sun finally touching your skin. But even there, the cold found you, because it no longer lived outside. It lived in you now. It owned you. There was no ticking clock in your room, no polished mahogany timepiece on the wall, no brass-belled alarm to nudge you awake. There was only the soundless chime of the hour that belonged to everyone but you, the rhythm of footsteps, of rustling gowns and clinking china. Those were the only hands that told your time. You rose before the world did, before the first thread of sunlight stitched itself into the curtains upstairs, before the rooster crowed, even before the rats beneath the floorboards finished their nightly quarrels. Your body knew the hour. It had learned the cruel math of servitude. The moment your eyes opened, you already ran late. No matter how quickly you moved, you would always be behind something. Behind the bell, behind the schedule, behind your own exhaustion. Today was Monday, which meant beating the rugs before breakfast service. You dressed in the same garments as yesterday, a coarse smock stiff with starch and soap, stockings mended so often they wore the needle's shape. Your boots scraped against your heels, hard leather cracked like old parchment. The lace at your collar had once been white. That was long ago. The bells began before the fire had taken, a soft tinkling from upstairs, delicate but urgent. You didn't need to check which bell it was. The third from the left always rang first. Miss Adeline, in the East Room, rising early for her piano scales. The corridor was still dark. You moved by memory, holding your breath. As you passed the butler's door, his temper was sharpest before his tea. In the breakfast room you swept crumbs from a table you had never eaten at, polished silver that would never pass your lips. You folded napkins into swans and lilies, their shapes meaningless, their creases fragile as the people who used them. By 7, you were delivering trays, toast stacked precisely, eggs soft-boiled, to the master's peculiar liking. You climbed the back stair with measured steps, counting each one. If the tray shifted, if the cup rattled, it would be your fault. Not the stairs, not the master's. Your. You placed the tray on the sideboard and withdrew. Your hands smelled of ash and soap. The mistress barely looked up from her letter. 8 o'clock. Polish the brass stair rods. 9. Clean chamber pots. 10. Air out the linen cupboard. 11. Black the range. Each task filled the gaps between the next, like stones in a riverbed. If one slipped, the current caught you. Time was not a gentle tide. It pulled. At noon, you paused in the courtyard to fetch water. The sun, though high, offered no warmth. Your breath clouded. The bucket was heavier than usual. You adjusted your grip, feeling the skin on your palm begin to blister. You passed Eliza on the steps. Her eyes were red. She carried a bundle of sheets larger than she was. Laundry room, she murmured, as if reminding herself. She hadn't eaten. You hadn't either. There was no bell for your hunger. By 1 o'clock, you were back in the scullery, scouring pots darkened by breakfast's excess. The hot water burned, but you welcomed it. The sting proved you still had feeling in your hands. You found yourself humming, softly, the tune your mother once sang. Then you stopped. The scullery wasn't a place for melody. At 2, the bell rang again. Drawing room. You dried your hands and followed the sound. The guest requested warm cider. You carried it in trembling hands, stepping carefully past the ornate rug that snagged on careless boots. You imagined tripping, imagined the splash, imagined the apology, the dismissal. But you didn't. At 3, you polished the brass in the foyer. The banister caught the light. A visiting governess nodded at you, without seeing you. At 4, you stoked the fires again. The one in the library always smoked. The flue was crooked. You knew it. The master refused to have it mended. Servants are cheaper than masons, he'd once said. At 5, the preparation for dinner began. The kitchen swelled with smells. Roast pheasant, turnips bathed in butter, wine-braised rabbit. You swallowed your saliva. These aromas were not yours. You set the table in the formal dining room, laying out 12 settings. Silver, porcelain, crystal, each piece placed precisely. A world of ritual for people who had never carried coal. At 6, the bell rang for the wine cellar. You descended into the damp, cobwebbed dark, the bottles whispering as you passed. You returned with the claret, careful not to let the dust fall. At 7, dinner was served. You stood behind the door, listening to the laughter, the scrape of knife on plate, the clink of toasts, the warmth. Your feet throbbed. Your stomach shrank. You would eat at 9, if anything was left. At 8, you cleared plates stacked with uneaten game, untouched roots, half-sipped soup. You didn't meet their eyes. You didn't speak. At 9, you dined with the other servants. Cold pudding, bread heels, boiled potatoes gone grey. Eliza ate slowly. The kitchen boy slept sitting up. The cook didn't speak. At 10, you polished shoes. At 11, folded linens. At midnight, cleaned spills from the hallway rug after a guest had dropped his brandy. By 1 in the morning, you crawled to your cot. Your day had not been measured in minutes. It had been measured in obedience. And in the few moments before sleep, when the house was silent, you wondered, not for the first time, if your life would ever belong to you again. But the thought passed. It always did. Tomorrow's bells would ring just the same. She was already at the hearth when you came in, knees bent beneath her, arms buried in ash. Eliza, 15, maybe, or younger. It was hard to tell. The fire painted her face in flickers. Light, soot, bone, flicker again. Her hands, black with coal dust, moved like machines. Silent, fast, worn. She didn't look up when you entered. She rarely did. You'd shared shifts with her for a month now, yet you'd heard her voice only 3 times. Once, when she asked for a turn with the mop. Once, when she whispered that the cook had taken her bread. And once, the night she cried in her sleep. That night you both pretended not to hear it. In a house of 20 servants, names were currency and Eliza's had none left to spend. To the housekeeper, she was that girl. To the mistress, the little one with the dull eyes. To the others, she was simply there, like the coal bin or the broom. Present, but peripheral. The morning bell rang twice. Eliza rose without being told, wiped her palms on her apron, and disappeared toward the scullery. You knew where she would go. You'd been sent there yourself when you first arrived. The knives needed scouring. You followed her down the narrow corridor, past the line of hooks holding aprons damp with yesterday's labour. The scullery door groaned open, revealing a room of stone and steam, copper pots stacked like war trophies. In the corner, a wooden table scarred by generations of chopping, peeling, and punishment. Eliza worked without pause. The whetstone scraped against the blades, rhythmic and precise. You joined her, scrubbing a cauldron that smelled of dried leek and bone. The air was thick with vapour and silence. The only music was the sound of metal surrendering to stone. When the cook entered, Eliza didn't flinch. She pressed her eyes downward, shoulders tight. The cook spoke over her, not to her. Don't dawdle. The partridge bones must be cleared before noon. The mistress wants a veal pie, and I won't be late because of lazy fingers. Eliza nodded. Not yes, ma'am. Not I understand. Just a nod. That was all she was allowed. Later you found her in the laundry room, folding linens too fine for her skin to ever touch. Her hands moved methodically, one corner to another. Then again, the sheets were warmed from the iron, the scent of lavender clinging to fabric like memory. She handled them with a reverence not for beauty, but for fear. A torn hem, a smudge, even a wrinkle could mean a week's wages gone. You dared to speak. Do you write home? She blinked, as if surprised by the sound, then nodded once. Do they answer? This time, a pause. No, she said softly, not looking up. Not for a while. You didn't ask more. You just watched her fold. That night, after supper, boiled carrots, bread, weak tea, you passed her cot on your way to your own. Her shoes sat neatly beneath it, soles facing the door. Her dress hung on a peg, still damp from the steam of the day. On her pillow lay a piece of paper. Not a letter, just paper, folded in half. Blank. You stood still. The candlelight behind you flickered in the draught. She was asleep already, curled toward the wall, her breath shallow, chest rising with effort. You remembered the first time you'd written home, how the ink had bled in the cold, how your fingers trembled from holding the pen. You remembered the weight, the aching hope, and how it felt when nothing ever came back. In the morning, Eliza didn't speak. She scrubbed the floors with her head bowed low, wrists red from the lie. The maid above stairs spilled ink on a velvet chair and blamed her. The mistress frowned, but said nothing. Eliza cleaned the stain with vinegar and tears. In the afternoon she peeled potatoes in the corner by the back window. Her fingers moved like water, never cutting, never slowing. You sat beside her, wordless. Her silence was no longer strange to you. It had become a language. Once, she had tried to speak to the mistress. You heard of it from the kitchen boy. Said something about her schedule, he whispered. Didn't go well. Since then, she had spoken only when required, and sometimes not even then. She folded napkins she'd never eat off, peeled potatoes she'd never taste, carried dresses she would never wear, and in each action she folded herself a little smaller. That evening, the butler passed her in the hall, didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't see her. She didn't mind. That, perhaps, was the worst part. She had become accustomed to being unseen. You wondered then how a person disappears. Not in an instant, but in a series of unspoken moments. 1,000 quiet surrenders. 100 unsent letters. The silence after being asked your name, and realizing no one had listened. You watched Eliza place a steaming towel on the mistress's vanity table. Her hands shook, just slightly. She turned, left the room, and closed the door behind her without sound. And you thought, it's not that they forget your name. It's that they never learned it to begin with. The dining hall below stairs was long and narrow, carved not from stone, but from concession. The walls sweat with condensation in winter, and in summer they blistered with heat from the kitchen next door. A single lamp flickered in the center of the ceiling, casting a pale cone of light onto the scarred wooden table, where the servants gathered to eat, if you could call it that. You arrived last, as always. You had been sent to clean a spill in the master's study, a trail of wine left by a guest who had lost his footing, and his dignity, after the second course. By the time you returned to the servants' hall, the meal had already begun. There was no ceremony here, no courses, no clinking of glasses or murmured praise for the soup. There was only the scrape of forks on tin, the slosh of weak gravy, and the silence of exhaustion. You took your seat on the end closest to the draft. Your bowl was filled with cabbage boiled beyond recognition, and a shard of potato so soft it melted into water. No one looked up as you ate. No one ever did. Down here, hunger made conversation a luxury. Above you, the master's guests were still feasting. You had seen the platters yourself as they passed: roasted duck in orange glaze, custards with burnt sugar crusts, silver trays of veal chops, garnished not for flavour but for spectacle. Once a guest had remarked that the rabbit was too tender. You had picked the bones off that same rabbit the next morning, cold and chewed. Tonight, there would be no bones. A crust of bread had been left on the plate beside you. Eliza sat across the table, eyes downcast. Her fingers toyed with the rim of her spoon. She had not touched her stew. You wondered if she was saving it, or simply beyond hunger. To your left, the boy footman Harry, no older than 12, slid a dry heel of bread into his pocket. No one stopped him. No one mentioned it. Everyone had seen the same thing. Everyone had done it before. You knew what that crust meant. It wasn't for him. He had a sister at home. You'd heard him speak of her once, late at night when peeling onions dulled his tongue. She was 6, too thin, with a cough that never left. Their mother worked in a textile mill. Their father had vanished, folded into the smoke of some distant factory town. That crust was medicine. A promise. The cook entered then, apron stained, arms like rolling pins. She dropped a pot onto the sideboard with a grunt. "That's it," she muttered. "Nothing left after this." No one responded. The butler sat at the head of the table, posture erect, fork held like a conductor's baton. He never spoke during meals, and no one dared address him. He ate slowly, deliberately, as though the act of chewing itself were a declaration of status. You swallowed your last bite of potato. It had the consistency of a paper napkin. You sipped water from a cup chipped on 3 sides. There was no wine. There was never wine. Eliza rose to clear the bowls. She moved like smoke, silent and shapeless. The others followed, stacking their dishes, wiping their mouths with sleeves. There was no dessert. There never was. After supper, you returned to the scullery to scrape the plates from upstairs. The contrast made your stomach twist. Not from jealousy, but from absurdity. On one plate, half a cut of venison, uneaten. On another, a chocolate tart stabbed once with a spoon, then abandoned. A sliver of goose breast with skin so crisp it cracked beneath your fingernail. You scraped them all into the bin. The cook had warned you. If you eat from their plates, you'll be dismissed. But sometimes you did. When no one was looking, when your ribs ached, when you needed to feel like you had stolen back something, however small, a bite of pheasant, a lick of marmalade, a spoon dipped in clotted cream, small rebellions, tasted in secret, swallowed with shame. Later that night, Harry passed you in the hallway, tray in hand. He didn't speak, just nodded. You saw the corner of the crust still in his pocket, now wrapped in a linen napkin. You nodded back. In the world above, food was art, leisure, power. Below, it was survival. You remembered your first meal here. You'd arrived fresh from the country, your shoes still muddy from the road, heart bruised from goodbye. You had been handed a bowl of grey broth and told, "Eat quickly, there's work yet." You had. And now, years later, the broth had not changed. In the quiet of the pantry, as you scrubbed dried gravy from porcelain with your fingers, you wondered what it must feel like to eat and not think of work. To eat and taste, to eat and be but there was no one to ask. Only the spoons, only the scraps, only the silence. The house glowed like a lantern from within. Every window shimmered with candlelight, reflected in the glass, as if the stars themselves had come to dine. From the gravel drive to the vaulted ceilings, everything above stairs glittered. Music rose in golden waves from the drawing room, violins and laughter twining like ivy up the stairwell. It was the night of the winter ball. For the guests, it meant champagne, silk gloves, and dances that flirted with scandal. For you, it meant more trays, more sweat, more hours on your feet. You stood just beyond the arch of the drawing room doorway, silver platter in hand. Upon it rested canapes too delicate to name, crafted with ingredients you'd never tasted. Each bite was a brushstroke of extravagance, gone in a blink. Guests took them with gloved fingers, barely noticing the trembling of your hand. Inside the room, light danced across marble and polished wood. Ladies twirled in gowns the color of crushed berries, dusk blue, champagne gold. Their laughter rose like birds startled from hedgerows. Gentlemen bowed and gestured, each movement precise, as though choreographed from birth. And you? You were a shadow. You wore the same black uniform as every other servant, brushed clean but forever worn at the seams. The collar itched, the shoes pinched, and still, you stood upright, tray aloft, eyes lowered, never watching but always seeing. Eliza brushed past you once, carrying a folded cloak to the guest rooms. Her dress caught on a loose nail at the edge of the stairwell, tearing the hem just enough for anyone looking to notice. No one did. Except you. Later, you found her in the hallway, a needle clenched in her teeth, trying to mend the tear by lamplight. Her hands shook, but she said nothing. There were no spare dresses, only her own. Back in the drawing room, a waltz began. The strings rose in sweeping arcs, pulling the dancers into orbit around the room. A girl in silver leaned into her partner's arm. You caught a glimpse of her smile, unguarded, bright as the flame of the chandelier above. You turned away. In the hall, you passed the refreshment table. Champagne bottles stood in crystal buckets, their ice misting into the air like breath. A man reached for one and tipped his glass. A drop spilled onto your sleeve. He didn't notice, or care. You didn't wipe it. Not yet. You returned to the kitchen once, near midnight, where the cook barked orders over a storm of steam and copper. More oysters. Refill the custards. Her face was flushed, her arms dusted in flour. You retrieved the next tray, its weight slicing into your palm, and returned upstairs without a word. In the grand hallway, a lady stumbled slightly on her heel. A gentleman caught her elbow. They laughed, their laughter carrying like perfume down the corridor. You stepped aside. The lady's gown brushed your leg, silk, warm from her skin. For a moment, you imagined being her, then forced the thought away. There was no use in wishing. Wishes had no place in this house. The ball thundered on. Fireplaces crackled in every room. The candles did not gutter. The floor shone as if blessed. You moved like a ghost between the living, serving, clearing, offering, obeying. One guest took a canapé and murmured, "You there? More wine?" "Yes." You bowed slightly and left to fetch it, though the request hadn't been yours to receive. Downstairs, the other footman had already gone to collect the bottle. You met him halfway up the stairs, your steps mirroring his in silence. Neither of you spoke. Back in the drawing room, the violins began their final set. The dancers were flushed with exertion and wine. Someone had spilled trifle on the rug, and a housemaid knelt quickly to clean it. Eyes down, cheeks red. Her rag smelled of vinegar and old soap. The guests stepped over her, as if she were part of the floor. Midnight came. The final dance ended. Guests yawned, giggled, exchanged parting words. Cloaks were retrieved, carriages summoned. You carried a tray of empty glasses through the entryway, weaving between furs and perfumes, and the rustle of parting wealth. As the last guest stepped into the snowy night, the great doors closed with a sigh. Silence followed. You stood in the foyer, back aching, shoes damp from melted ice. Eliza emerged with a broom. You looked at each other, but said nothing. The chandeliers were still lit. They always were. In the ballroom, crumbs dotted the edge of the carpet. A smudge of cream streaked across a chair. Somewhere, a string snapped on a violin, left carelessly against the piano. The glitter was gone. The beauty had passed. And now, only the servants remained to erase the evidence of joy they were never invited to share. You began to clean. The house, once filled with laughter, watched silently. It knew. This was the truest part of the ball. The part where you again became invisible. You were summoned with a knock. Not a bell this time, not the clatter of silver or the scrape of coal scuttles, but a soft, deliberate knock on the scullery door. It was just past 8, the candles burned low, and the scent of boiled meat still clung to your apron. Eliza was beside you, polishing spoons. You saw her flinch. The under-housemaid stood in the doorway, her eyes averted. "He wants you," she said. She didn't need to say who. You followed her up the servants' stairs, your heart laced with something colder than fear. Not dread exactly. No dread had passed the week before, and again the week before that. What you felt now was numb recognition, the kind that came when something cruel had grown too familiar. The master's study was warm. Too warm. The fire hissed with fresh logs, the air thick with pipe smoke and brandy. The curtains were drawn tight, the walls lined with books whose titles you couldn't read from where you stood. He didn't turn when you entered, just waved a gloved hand, an idle flick of the wrist, as if dismissing dust. "Come here," he said, his voice like velvet laid over glass. You obeyed. There was a coat on the back of the chair, a pair of gloves on the desk, leather, embossed with initials. He gestured again, this time toward the buttons on his waistcoat. "Too tight," he muttered. "Can't manage the bottom too." You stepped forward, trembling, not from cold, not anymore. Your hands, reddened from lie and labor, reached toward the brass buttons, each one carved like a coin. You had done this before, for the mistress, for guests, for the butler himself, but never for him, not like this. Your fingers brushed the fabric. He smelled of tobacco and sandalwood, a rich scent, foreign. He watched you, not your hands, but your face. His gaze lingered too long. You fumbled. The second button slipped. You caught it before it fell. He smiled. "Careful," he said. "This waistcoat costs more than you'll earn in a year." You didn't answer. You knew better. Words could twist, even the softest ones. So you stayed silent, finishing your task, then stepped back. But he didn't move. "You're a quiet one," he said, swirling the brandy in his glass. "I like that." You stood with your hands folded at your apron. You felt your heart beat in your throat. It thudded once, twice, then steadied, not into calm, but into resignation. The kind you'd seen in Eliza's eyes when the cook shouted, the kind that lives in a creature too small to flee. He stood then, slow, deliberate. His shadow stretched long in the firelight. He reached for the gloves, then paused. "You do good work," he said. "The housekeeper speaks highly of you." He took a step closer. You didn't move. His hand rose, not threatening, not overt. Just a gloved fingertip beneath your chin, tilting your face upward. His eyes were unreadable. Not cruel, not kind, just full of himself, full of the house, full of the belief that he, and he alone, deserved the world's silence. Then, just as suddenly, he turned away. "Go now," he said, voice smooth. "Tell Mrs. Hales, I'll want coffee after 10. You left without a word. Down the stairs, past the bells, past the servants' corridor with its flickering lamps and air thick with bleach. Your legs shook only once, when you reached the linen closet, empty and dark, where you leaned your head against the shelf and breathed. You didn't cry. Crying was a luxury. You hadn't cried in weeks. You found Eliza later by the back window. Her eyes found yours, and for a moment neither of you spoke, but she knew. She always knew. "It's the glove," she said softly. "The left one." You nodded. "Still smells like pipe smoke." "I hate that smell," she whispered. You stood there together in the dark, watching the snow fall on the garden steps. The frost had crept onto the windows, swirling in patterns like lace. The next day, another girl was called. She went quietly, came back quieter. No one said her name for a week. These moments were never discussed. They existed only in the spaces between chores, in the glances exchanged during tea service, in the way hands trembled while folding cravats. The house protected its own, not the ones who served it, but the ones who wore its keys. The ones who smelled of pipe smoke and walked you slowly down hallways that should have been passed through fast. One mistake, one protest, one accusation, and you would be gone. Not punished, not scolded, erased, dismissed with a reference too vague to protect you. And so you stayed. You folded gloves. You scrubbed hearths. You bore the touch. And at night, you lay in your cot, hands clenched into fists beneath the blankets, whispering your name like a warding prayer. Because in this house, survival was not just work. It was silence. The wind came in from the moorlands that night, sly, spiteful, and sharp as a butcher's knife. It whistled through the chimneys and howled across the upper windows, rattling the glass in its panes. The house groaned as if remembering older storms. Downstairs you felt it first in your fingers, then your spine. It was just past 2 in the morning. Most of the house had sunk into velvet sleep, but not you. You were awake, coaxing dying embers in the drawing room, scraping ash from beneath the grate. The day had been long. 13 hours without pause. A blister on your heel had split open before supper. Your left arm ached from lifting buckets of coal. Your head throbbed with the rhythm of the wind. Still, you worked. That fire, Lord Hensley's, in the east-facing bedroom, had gone out twice already this week. He disliked the cold, hated waking to a room not already stifling. The coal must be added precisely, the wood angled just so, too little and it would die. Too much and it would smoke. You followed the routine with numb precision. Kindling, paper, a coal or two, gently placed. You lit the taper and leaned in, breath held. Flame took, weak at first, then stronger. Orange fingers, licking the shadows. You watched for a minute just to be sure. Then you left, closing the grate with care, latching the door with a click quieter than breath. You returned to the scullery and collapsed onto the low stool near the basin. Your bones sagged with relief. There were still boots to polish before morning, but just for a moment you rested. When the bell rang, it rang like judgment. It was the fourth bell from the left, the master's room. You froze. It was barely an hour since you'd left it. You knew before you arrived. The fire had died. Lord Hensley stood beside his bed in his robe, jaw clenched, eyes colder than the room. His boots were already on, though his hair stuck out in sleep-worn tufts. He did not shout. He didn't need to. "The fire is out," he said. You curtsied. "Yes, my lord." "You lit it?" "Yes, my lord." He stepped aside and pointed toward the grate. You moved quickly, kneeling, lifting the cover. The embers were stone grey, the room's cold pressed into your skin like blame. "I'll see the housekeeper in the morning," he said. "This is the third time." You bowed your head. "It won't happen again." "No," he said. "It won't." He walked away, slippers soft against the carpet. You rebuilt the fire in silence. The kindling was damp now. The wood hissed as it caught. You worked quickly, deliberately, as if each movement might save you. It wouldn't. The next morning, Mrs. Hales found you before the breakfast bell. Her lips were thin as string. She didn't ask questions. She simply spoke. "You've been warned once. Lord Hensley says it's the last." You nodded. She turned away. No more was said, but everything changed. You were reassigned to scullery duty, full-time. No more tray service. No more fires. Your name disappeared from the hallway schedule. Eliza brought you word in the laundry corridor, her face drawn, voice low. "They're watching," she whispered. "Be careful." You nodded. Your breath fogged the air. That night, you lay in your cot fully clothed, boots still on. Not from fatigue, though it clawed at your bones, but from readiness. The fear of being summoned again, of another fire, another failure. Outside, the wind wailed like a child lost in a forest. Inside, the cold was constant. The house refused warmth, as if punishing you for your error. The next morning you passed Lord Hensley in the corridor. He did not look at you, but you felt his presence like a nail in your spine. Later, in the pantry, you overheard the footman murmur, "They're looking for someone new." You said nothing. You scrubbed harder. You told yourself it had been the wind, the damp, the chimney's draw. But you knew. It didn't matter why the fire had gone out, only that it had. And it hadn't been his fire. Not really. It had been yours. Yours to tend. Yours to blame. The weight of it settled in your chest, hot and unfair. You carried that blame all day, like a smudge on your apron no scrubbing could erase. The steam struck your face like breath from a burning mouth, wet, hot, and constant. It clung to your lashes, seeped into your sleeves, wrapped around your throat, like wool dipped in boiling water. The laundry room was a world unto itself, hidden behind the larder, and past a door, swollen from damp. Its walls sweated year-round. The windows stayed shut. No fresh air dared enter. This was Agnes's domain. You met her first through sound, not her voice, but the hiss of the copper boiler, the slap of linen against stone, the hiss and squeal of the iron as it kissed fabric. The rhythm of her work echoed like ritual, harsh, methodical, sacred. She stood in the center of the room, a figure carved from smoke and labor. Her apron was stained with decades of lye and lard. Her sleeves were always rolled. Her forearms rippled with the kind of strength that came not from exercise, but from years of lifting wet sheets heavier than a corpse. "Don't stand there blinking," she said when she saw you. "Take those linens and wring." You obeyed. The sheets were freshly boiled, pulled from the scalding tub with a long-handled stick. You reached in with your bare hands. The heat bit into your skin like fangs. You flinched. She watched. Not unkindly. "You'll lose the feeling by week's end," she said. "That's when you're doing it right." You wrung the fabric until your knuckles screamed. Water pooled at your feet. The floor was always slick. Beneath your boots, the stones squelched with every step. Agnes worked beside you, silent now, arms moving like pistons. She never paused, not even to wipe her brow. You saw the scars on her hands, white ridges where acid had kissed her years ago. One knuckle on her right hand no longer bent. She didn't seem to notice. "Used to be 6 of us in here," she said suddenly, folding a shirt with the precision of a priest handling a relic. "Now, just me and you, for the day." You glanced at her. "Where did they all go?" you asked. "Gone," she said. "Married, sick, dismissed, dead. A few. One went off to be a governess. Always fancied herself better than sheets." She didn't laugh. She didn't need to. You fetched more linens. The pile never shrank. It grew as you worked, as if the house itself spawned more cloth to punish you. Midday came without light. The only clock was the rhythm of your spine, bending, lifting, folding. Your apron clung to you. Soaked through, your hands throbbed. You watched Agnes starch a collar with the delicacy of lacework. "This one's the master's," she said. "Likes them stiff enough to cut." She pressed the iron with a hiss. "I pressed his collars on the day he married, pressed them on the day his first son died, pressed them every Sunday since." You wondered how many griefs her arms had ironed away. A blouse slipped from your hands into the rinse basin. You reached in, caught it. She said nothing, just kept folding. Later, she spoke again. "I had 3 boys," she said. "All gone now. 1 to the sea, 1 to the pit, 1 to the bottle." You didn't know what to say. She didn't expect an answer. "We buried their father under a rowan tree," she continued. "The only good man I ever knew." She reached for the next sheet. "Now I press out strangers' creases. Seems fitting." The boiler groaned. You refilled the tub. The soap stung your wrists. Agnes handed you a towel. Her hand brushed yours. It was rough as bark, warm from the iron's ghost. "You'll get through," she said. It wasn't comfort. It was command. The afternoon passed in steam and silence. Once you sang quietly, under your breath, just to test your voice. She didn't stop you. You wondered if the steam had softened her ears. At dusk, you stepped outside with the wash basket, arms shaking. The wind hit you like a slap. The cold wrapped around your wet sleeves and sank into your chest. You placed the linens on the line. They froze in minutes, stiff as canvas. Back inside, Agnes handed you a cup of broth. "Don't drink too fast," she said. "Let it warm you." You sat on an upturned crate, sipping. The heat slipped down your throat, slow and welcome. She stood beside the boiler, back straight, eyes on the next pile. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said. Same as always. You believed her. Agnes was not just the laundress. She was the queen of this quiet kingdom. Its steam, its silence, its sorrow, all bowed to her. And as you left that night, your bones aching and your fingers burned, you turned back to glimpse her through the crack of the door. Still folding, still strong, still alone. The candle was nearly gone, just a stub of wax and a trembling wick hissing in the draught from the window above your cot. You cupped your hands around it as if protecting a secret. In truth, you were. A folded sheet of paper rested on your lap, blank but heavy. Your pen scratched lightly in your grip, its nib dull from too many sharpenings on the stone step near the pantry door. It was your day's end, the only moment that belonged to you. The house had gone still, the corridors silent, save for the occasional groan of old beams settling under the weight of another sleepless night. The air in the attic room was cold, sharp enough to numb your toes, but your hands were sweating. You stared at the paper. You had written 3 letters since arriving. None had been sent. The first was to your mother. You had tried to describe the house, the size of it, the endless halls, the velvet curtains that blocked out all light. You had written of the bell system, and how the brass trembled on the wall like anxious chimes in a storm. But you never finished it. You hadn't known how to explain that you hadn't heard your name in 3 days. The second had been to your brother. He was 12 when you left, always full of questions. You had tried to tell him about the kitchen boy, Harry, who reminded you of him. But then you remembered Harry's hollow cheeks, his quiet cough, the way he hid crusts in his pillow. You'd folded the letter in half and never wrote the end. Now, you tried again. You dipped the pen, lifted it, then froze. What could you say? That you lived on borrowed hours? That your sleep was shattered by bells and boots and the scream of kettles boiling dry? That you sometimes looked into the polished silver of the tea tray just to see if you still had a face? You wrote slowly, "Dearest mother, I am safe. I am working hard. I rise before the sun and sleep when it is long gone. The house is large and full of corners. I have found some quiet in them. Sometimes I think of the garden behind our old cottage, the one with the wild mint and the cracked watering can. I hope it still grows." You paused. The ink smudged beneath your palm. The paper trembled as your fingers ached. Then you added, "Tell Thomas I miss his voice. Tell him the boy here is brave, like him, and tired, like me. Love always." But you did not sign it. You folded the letter, then unfolded it, then folded it again. You placed it inside the hollow of your mattress, behind the 4th button on the seam, beside the others. 3 unsent letters, none addressed. You weren't sure where they'd go, even if posted. The cottage had likely changed hands. The mill was gone. Thomas might be working now, or wandering, or sick, or worse. And what if your words reached them? Would they recognize you in them? Would they know the girl who now scrubbed hearths until her knees bled, who boiled linen until her skin blistered, who watched her own reflection fade in the water pail each morning? The wind outside lifted a loose shingle. It rattled above your head like an impatient tap. You pressed your eyes shut. Earlier that day, you had found a corner of quiet behind the drying yard wall. There, in the brittle grass, you'd watched a bird, small, brown, unremarkable, hop in tight circles around a piece of string. It pecked once, twice, then flew away. You had felt jealous. Even a sparrow knew how to escape. There was no post for you, no letters received. The house never paused for your thoughts. The upstairs mail came in with the cream and the fish, bundled neatly in tied cords, names pressed in ink so fine it looked sewn. You sorted it once by mistake. You saw the script. It looked like language from another world. You never touched it again. Back in your cot, you breathed into your hands to warm them. The candle guttered. You took a blank sheet and began again. Not to your mother, not to your brother. This one was to no one, or to yourself. I am still here. I have not vanished. I wait. I serve. I remember. I dream when I can. You folded this one too, pressed it flat, tucked it beneath the mattress. No name, no stamp, but it was enough. For now, to know the words existed somewhere, even if no one ever read them, even if you forgot how to speak them aloud, even if the only one listening was the silence. Sunday arrived like a whisper. No bells, no thundering boots, no shouting cooks or crashing pots. The sun was gentler too, filtered through clouds the color of linen water. It crept through the high windows without urgency, laying soft shadows on the scrubbed floors. For a moment the house held its breath. This was your day of rest. But rest, in your world, was never stillness. You rose just after dawn. Not because you were called, but because your body no longer remembered how to sleep beyond 6. Your back ached. Your legs throbbed. But there was laundry to mend, and shoes to patch, and no one else would do it for you. You fetched your sewing kit from beneath the cot. The tin rusted at its hinge. Thread had grown scarce. The last bit of black was frayed, barely enough to bind a tear in your only second pair of stockings. You stitched carefully, the needle biting your fingertips, over and over, until the hole was no longer visible, only felt. Eliza passed by the hallway door. Her hair was down, brushed smooth for once, a quiet rebellion. She offered a soft nod, no words, none need. After the mending, you took your apron to the pump behind the kitchen yard. The iron handle was stiff from frost. You pumped with both arms, the water spilling over your wrists, clean but cold enough to sting. You scrubbed the apron on a flat stone, watching the soap swirl like clouds torn by wind. When it was clean enough, you wrung it tight and draped it on the line beside Harry's shirt. A single droplet fell from the hem and landed on your boot. It soaked through. By noon, the chores slowed. No guests today. No luncheons. The master and mistress had gone to church in the village. The others followed. Mrs. Hales in black gloves. The cook with her shoes polished. Eliza in borrowed lace. You stayed behind. Someone had to tend the fires. Someone always did. But when the parlour flames were set, when the silver was dusted and the coal brought in, the house fell silent again, and for the first time all week, you were free. You took the long way out, through the back corridor, lined with oil lamps. Dust clung to the glass. You opened the heavy door to the garden, stepping out into pale afternoon. The wind was soft, rustling through the last of the dead ivy. Frost still shimmered in the corners of the grass, turning brown blades into glassy spines. You walked past the drying yard, past the stables, empty now, through the side gate the guests never used, and out onto the edge of the estate. A path wound through the birch trees. You followed it, boots crunching quietly on the gravel, hands tucked beneath your shawl. The silence here was different. Not empty, just unbothered. You came to the linden tree near the stream. It was old, older than the house perhaps. Its roots split the earth like veins. Beneath it sat a bench, weathered by seasons. You lowered yourself onto it slowly, your bones grateful. The stream burbled beside you, breaking itself gently on stones. A bird called from the canopy above, a warble like a lullaby. The air smelled of damp leaves and moss. You closed your eyes, and in that moment just one you felt like a person again. Not a servant, not a shadow, not a pair of hands with no voice. Just you. You remembered how your mother once brushed your hair on Sundays, fingers light and fragrant with rosemary, how your brother brought you dandelions in spring, how your feet once knew grass better than stone. You opened your eyes. The sky had shifted. Soft greys and blue above, the kind of light that never chose a side, neither dawn nor dusk. Just the pause between. You stood slowly, knees stiff. You would have to return soon. The fire in the mistress's dressing room would need tending before her bath. The bread would need proofing. The candle stubs replaced. But for now, you lingered. A single leaf fell from the linden, brushing your shoulder as it passed. You caught it, pressed it between your fingers, folded it into the corner of your shawl. Proof that you had been here, that you had sat, that you had rested. Even if no one saw, even if no one believed. You walked back slowly, each step a silent defiance of the rush that ruled your life. The house loomed again in the distance, smoke curling from its chimneys, bells waiting to ring. But for 1 hour on a Sunday afternoon, the world had paused, and you had lived within it. It was after supper, when the pots had cooled and the last of the ash had been cleared from the hearths, that you heard the whisper. You were crouched in the corridor just off the kitchen, rolling clean cloths into neat cylinders for the breakfast service. Eliza sat across from you, polishing forks with a rag that had already worn through at the corners. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said. The words were soft, as if fragile, like something dropped and broken long ago. You froze for a moment, fingers still on the cloth, then resumed the motion. Slowly. "She did too," Eliza added. "My sister. Read every book she could find. Our gran used to say she'd teach the king to spell his own name." You glanced at her. Her eyes were fixed on the silverware, the candlelight glinting in her irises like distant stars. The polish moved in circles. She didn't stop. "Where is she now?" you asked. She hesitated. "Married a blacksmith. Has 5 children. Lives in Gloucester." Another pause. "Elbows like iron," she says. "From lifting babies." You smiled. "Barely." "I wanted to be a seamstress," you said. "Not for finery, for wedding dresses. I used to pretend I'd sew for everyone in the village, all their happiest days. It came out too quickly, too easily. You regretted it the moment it left your mouth." But Eliza only nodded. "You'd have been good," she said. The corridor fell quiet again, not with silence, but with memory. The dust in the corner caught the candlelight like frost. Footsteps sounded in the hallway above. The mistress, most likely, returning from her evening stroll. The bells remained mercifully still. Later that night, In the attic dormitory, you lay staring at the ceiling. The beams above you creaked with the sighs of old timber. Below, the house slept in layered hush parlor, scullery, hall, stair. You listened to the rhythm of breath beside you. Agnes snored softly. The kitchen maid mumbled in her sleep. Eliza lay still. You thought of the dreams folded like handkerchiefs in the corners of everyone's lives. The dreams no one spoke of until the night grew long enough to allow it. The butler once studied Latin. You had overheard him murmuring conjugations beneath his breath, while waiting for the drawing-room doors to open. Mrs. Hales kept a battered piano score in the bottom drawer of her desk, its corners frayed, the pages faint with oil from fingers long unpracticed. And you had learned to stitch before you could write. Your mother taught you on scraps of curtain, drawing flowers in chalk, so you could follow the lines. You remembered the feel of the thread between your fingers, the joy of making something delicate. Now, you mended socks. Now, you stitched buttons with haste and bent shoulders, not beauty. Eliza stirred on her cot. I miss the smell of pencils, she murmured. You blinked. She didn't say more, but in that single, strange sentence, a world opened between you. You wondered what other pieces of forgotten selves floated through these halls, what dreams had been smothered in soot, soaked in lye, crushed beneath trays of untouched food. Dreams were dangerous here. They made you careless, made you slow, made you long. And longing was a form of disobedience. The house did not care for those who longed. It required service, precision, quiet hands, blank eyes. You pulled your shawl tighter around you. One day, perhaps, you would leave. Save enough coin to take a train west. Find a tailor in some market town and beg for apprenticeship. Maybe you'd stitch your name into your own work one day. A hem, a collar, something beautiful, something made from your hands alone. But not now, not yet. The candle beside the door flickered once, then died. In the darkness, you allowed yourself one thought, one thread of possibility. Maybe dreams did not die in this house. Maybe they slept thin and quiet beneath the dust, waiting. The crash was sharp, glass against marble, sudden as thunder in summer. You flinched, hand halting mid-polish, silver cloth dangling limp. The noise had come from the parlour, a sound not meant for downstairs ears, but one that reached anyway, carried through the bones of the house. You looked up. Eliza stood across the hallway, motionless. Her eyes widened, then dropped. She knew. Moments later the call came. Eliza. It was the mistress's voice, stern and clipped, heavy with that slow kind of fury reserved for disappointment. Eliza disappeared through the double doors. You followed with your thoughts. She had been dusting in the east parlour. You had seen her carrying the cloth and the basin, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The porcelain vase had stood on the mantel for generations, painted with blue cranes and cherry blossoms, the sort of ornament no one touched, but everyone noticed. Now it was in pieces. You weren't there when it happened, but you knew she didn't break it. You knew because you had seen the maid from upstairs, Anne, balancing a tray of afternoon tea, chattering with the footman, brushing the mantle with her hip as she turned too quickly. You had seen the vase tip. You had seen Eliza reach, too late. Now she stood in the parlour, head bowed. The mistress held the broken shard in her hand like a weapon dressed in paint. Her expression was unreadable, her words quiet enough to muffle beneath the carpet. Later, Eliza returned to the scullery. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just scrubbed the table with such force the wood began to fray. The butler summoned you shortly after. He stood in the entryway to the back corridor, arms folded behind his back. His gaze was level. You were nearby, he said. You nodded. Did you see it? Your breath caught. Yes, you whispered. I was in the hall. He waited. You swallowed. I saw the vase fall. Who touched it? Your tongue felt thick. You heard the words before you said them. They echoed already. Eliza, you replied. He gave a curt nod. You're dismissed. Not from your post, but from the conversation. You returned to the scullery. Eliza was rinsing cloths in silence. You sat beside her. She didn't look up. You couldn't tell her. You couldn't take it back. That night, you found a small stone in your pocket. Not large, smooth, round, grey. You didn't know where it came from. Perhaps the garden path, perhaps the hem of your apron, but you held it. It felt like guilt. In the days that followed, Eliza was reassigned. Back to coal, back to floors. Her hands grew raw again. Her voice thinner. She stopped speaking altogether. Anne never mentioned the vase. No one did. The parlour looked as it always had, the mantel now bare. No one questioned the emptiness. One morning, you passed Anne in the corridor. Her eyes darted. You said nothing. She did not nod. Later, Eliza collapsed beside the wash basin, knees folding like linen. The cook blamed low blood sugar. The housekeeper muttered about laziness. You brought her a spoonful of broth when no one looked. She didn't thank you, but she met your eyes. That was worse. Loyalty, you realized, wasn't a virtue here. It was currency, one you didn't always choose to spend. You lied to survive. You obeyed to remain, even when it cost someone else their name. That night, you held the stone again in your palm. You imagined placing it at Eliza's bedside. An apology. But what could a stone say? You slipped it into the drawer of the scullery cabinet instead. Let it live there between the polishing rags and the silver spoons. A weight, not easily thrown away. The pantry was dark when you entered. Darker than usual. A single oil lamp flickered on the wall, casting pale gold across rows of preserved fruits, flour sacks and pickled onions, stacked like cloudy marbles in their brine. You had come to collect tea for the mistress's tray, just as you had the day before, and the day before that. But tonight, something was wrong. You saw him first by the base of the shelving, curled in on himself like a question no one dared answer. Harry, the boy footman. No older than 12, his knees tucked to his chest, arms wrapped around his shins, head bowed low beneath a mop of unbrushed hair. You knelt beside him. Harry? No response. Harry, you said again, this time softer, as if trying not to wake a dream. He stirred, slowly, lifted his face toward you. His eyes blinked once, as though sleep had crusted them shut. I just sat for a moment, he mumbled. But you need... He hadn't moved for hours. His cheeks were hollow, lips pale, hands streaked with ash and dough. He had worked breakfast and luncheon both, then fetched coal for the upper rooms, carried tea to the drawing room, helped the cook in the kitchen, folded linens in the laundry passage, scrubbed the carriage wheels after dinner. He had not eaten. He had not stopped. His feet were bare. I didn't mean to sleep, he whispered. I was just waiting for the kettle to boil. You touched his shoulder gently. It was warm, but not well. You should be in bed, you said. He shook his head. Still have the boots to finish. You looked down. At his side lay a scuffed pair of leather shoes, guest shoes, glossy with polish, soles thick enough to muffle footsteps. His fingers had tried. You saw the rag clenched in one hand, its threads torn through. You stood and stepped to the shelf, rummaged behind a jar of gooseberries, until your hand found what you remembered, a crust of bread, hard, dried, meant for the pigs, likely, but still whole. You returned, knelt, and offered it to him without a word. He stared for a moment, then took it. He didn't thank you. He didn't need to. The way he chewed, slow, careful, as if his body had forgotten how, was enough. You sat beside him. The pantry smelled of dust and vinegar. The walls were cool to the touch. A draught crept in beneath the door. You pulled your shawl tighter around your shoulders. After a while, Harry spoke again. My sister's younger than me, he said. She has a doll made of rags. Carries it everywhere. I promised I'd send her a ribbon. You nodded, even though he wasn't looking at you. She asked if I saw candles every day. I told her they were like stars, all lined up. He blinked, swallowed, bit the crust again. She wants to be a dancer. The lamp hissed. She thinks I live in a castle. You didn't have the heart to correct him. Later, when he had finished the crust and fallen asleep again, you carried the boots to the corner and polished them yourself. Quietly, slowly. You set them on the shelf where the butler would expect them. You left the rag folded, his work complete. Then you returned to him. You draped your shawl over his shoulders. Just for an hour. Just until someone noticed. In the morning, he was gone. Up early again. Back at work. The cook shouted at him by noon for dropping a plate. No one mentioned the pantry. No one saw. You passed him in the corridor near dusk. He looked at you just once, just briefly, and offered a ghost of a nod. That night, you found a ribbon in the drawer beside your cot, pale blue, frayed at the edges. You didn't know where it came from, but you left it there. For the girl who wanted to dance. For the boy who thought candles were stars. The door closed with a sound far too soft for what it meant. A click, barely louder than a breath. But in that silence you heard the shifting of a season. A change, not of weather, but of fate. It was morning, cold and still. The windows above the staircase wore a sheen of frost that glowed white in the pale sun. You were polishing the baseboards in the main hall when you heard it. Lord Hemsley's voice, firm and deliberate, echoing from the drawing room. London by week's end. You paused, rag in hand. Inform the staff, he continued. Only essentials will accompany us. The words moved through the house like a current through water, rippling, distorting everything in its path. By noon, the servants knew. By supper, you could feel the tension pulsing behind every closed door. London, the season. A grand townhouse near Grosvenor Square. New routines, new guests, new rules. But not all would go. Only a few. You folded your apron in the scullery with unusual care, hands stilled by dread. The others moved quietly around you, each one calculating their value, their odds, their invisibility. Mrs. Hales made her rounds with a clipped voice and eyes sharper than usual. She watched every movement, every misstep, as if taking inventory not just of linen and silver, but of usefulness. By evening the whispers had begun. They'll take Fen, of course. He knows the townhouse. And the cook. Can't do without meals. Maybe Eliza. She's young. Quick. Not the boot boy. Too small. You said nothing. You waited. In the laundry room, Agnes ironed with unusual fervour, her hands pressed harder than usual, her breath a little faster. You could hear it in the way the collar snapped beneath her palm. They won't take me, she said, not looking up. Too old. You didn't argue, because she was right. In the hallway, you passed Eliza. She stood with her back against the pantry door, arms folded across her chest. Her mouth was tight. You stopped beside her. Neither of you spoke. She reached into her pocket, drew out a scrap of paper. A reference, she said quietly. In case I'm let go. You took it gently. A single line from a former employer, long ago, ink faded, paper creased, worth little. But it was all she had. You folded it back and handed it to her. They won't let you go, you said. She didn't answer. Upstairs, the master's wife was instructing her maid on which gowns to pack. The sound of crumpling fabric drifted down the stairwell. You passed by, silently, unseen, your own shoes worn thin from months of walking the same hall. That night, after the bells were still, you climbed the attic steps and found Harry already in his cot. His hands clutched the pale blue ribbon you'd seen days before. He didn't look up. They won't take me, he said. I know it. He was 12. The words felt too heavy in his mouth. You sat beside him for a while. Said nothing. There was nothing to say. The next morning, names were called. Fen. The cook. Anne. Eliza. You waited for yours. It did not come. Your stomach did not drop. It simply folded, like parchment sealed without a letter. In the scullery, Eliza stared at the floor. They only took 4, she said. You nodded. I'll write if I can, she added. You didn't ask where to. The carriage came at dawn 2 days later. Its wheels groaned over frozen mud. The air was thick with breath and snow. Trunks were hoisted, cases packed. Eliza stood on the steps, a shawl draped over her shoulders, hair pulled tight. She didn't cry. You watched from the corner near the garden gate. She saw you. She raised her hand once. The carriage pulled away. You stood in the doorway long after the frost had melted on the threshold. Inside, the house felt wrong. Quiet, yes, but not peaceful. Empty, but not still. The closing of the door had done more than usher out the departing. It had divided those who remained. That night, you stood by the east window in the linen room, watching the sky turn from ash to ink. A single star hung low. You did not wish. You did not dare. Below in the pantry, Harry was coughing again. Upstairs, the mistress's room was silent. The house had changed, shifted, but you were still here, and the door had closed behind the life you'd almost had. The scullery was still when it happened, still in the way that only houses can be, when no one's watching. Not silent. No, but still. The hearth had gone out an hour before. The water in the basin had cooled. The lamps had burned low, the flame behind the glass a mere whisper of gold. You were alone. The evening had stretched long. Supper trays returned, half full. The master and mistress were gone to London, the house emptied of its appetite. Those who remained had grown quieter, more mechanical. Tasks continued, but without the urgency that once gave them rhythm. You'd felt it too, that loose thread of aimlessness, of tension unwound but not yet cut. You were drying the last of the china, a teacup, delicate, ivory white, with blue filigree curling around its rim like frozen sea foam. It wasn't meant for you, wasn't part of your world. You held it lightly, out of habit, carefully, and yet it slipped. No stumble, no clatter, no accident, just let go. It fell with the elegance of something released, not dropped, as if gravity too had grown tired. The sound was sharp, a clean crack like ice splitting on a pond, pieces scattered across the tile, glinting in the lamplight like teeth. You stared at them. For a moment, you waited for the shout, the scolding, the summoning. But no one came. The house remained still. You knelt, slowly, and gathered the shards in your apron, one by one, edges slicing through the soft folds of linen. You felt one piece bite into your palm, just deep enough to sting, just enough to remind you that your skin was still yours. A drop of blood welled in the crease of your hand. You wrapped the largest shard in a polishing cloth and placed it on the counter. The rest you swept into the dustbin, except one. You kept it, a crescent-shaped sliver, smooth along the edge, small enough to disappear into your palm. You tucked it into the pocket of your apron. It was still warm from the water, and now warm from you. A piece of something that had never been yours, but was now. You didn't know why, but it felt right. Not as rebellion, not even as defiance. Just as proof. Proof that something had broken, that something had slipped. Later that night, you sat at the top of the servants' stairs, your shawl draped over your knees. The light from the corridor spilled across the floor like cream, soft and pale. From the kitchen below, the cook's voice rose once, sharp and irritated, then quiet again. You reached into your pocket, the shard pressed against your fingers. It didn't hurt. Not anymore. You thought of Eliza riding toward London, a different house, a different world, of Agnes, folding linen as if each crease could hold back time, of Harry coughing softly beneath a blanket too thin for winter. And you thought of yourself, of the girl who hadn't dropped the cup, not by accident, but by choice. The next morning you stitched a new lining into your apron. The old one was stained from the blood. You worked carefully, slowly, folding the fabric over itself. The shard stayed tucked between layers, hidden, safe. The butler passed you in the corridor. "Careful with the china," he said, without looking at you. You nodded. "I will," you replied. But the truth was already pocketed. A quiet crack. A moment no one else had seen. A sliver of porcelain that whispered, "Every time you touched it, you are still here. You are still whole. And something, somewhere, belongs to you alone." The boiler hissed louder than usual that morning. A long, gurgling sigh that echoed through the laundry room, like a breath drawn too deep. The copper basin steamed steadily, but no hands stirred it. No arms reached in to lift the linens. The bench by the press sat empty, its seat still warm from yesterday's labour. Agnes hadn't come down. It was the first time in 16 years. You waited a moment at the top of the stair, unsure whether to step inside without her. The laundry room had always belonged to her, ruled not by bells or schedules, but by her rhythm, the unbroken, ceaseless tempo of soaking, wringing, folding, pressing. She was the queen of that steam-shrouded kingdom, and you a loyal apprentice. But the throne was cold now. The housekeeper's voice found you in the corridor. "She's taken ill. Won't be in today. See to the linens." No questions, no concern, just the task. You descended into the warm gloom alone. The steam rose without purpose now. It filled the air with memory instead of heat. You stood at the basin, staring into the pale, cloudy water. A sheet floated on the surface like a ghost waiting to be claimed. You dipped your arms in. The warmth bit your skin. Agnes had once told you the burn meant it was working. You worked her rhythm. You wrung each cloth as she had, your palms raw by the second hour. You folded napkins like squares of grief, watched the starch dry on collars once shaped by her hands. But nothing landed as it used to. The silence had changed. That afternoon you asked Harry if he had seen her. He shook his head. The cook says she's up in her room, he whispered. Coughing bad, didn't eat breakfast. You found a reason to climb the attic stairs. The servants' quarters above were drafty, dim, dust shivered in the beams. You approached her door, plain wood, the knob loose, the paint flaking. You knocked gently. No answer. You knocked again. A rustle. Then a cough, deep and wet. The door creaked open an inch. Agnes sat on the edge of her cot, swathed in wool, her figure smaller than you remembered. Her apron had been folded on her chair. Her hair was unbraided. Her hands, those mighty hands, lay quiet in her lap. Fingers swollen, knuckles pale. She looked at you, and her eyes softened. Come to borrow the starch? She asked, voice raspy. You shook your head. Brought you broth. She motioned you in. The room smelled of lavender soap and damp cloth. A candle flickered in the corner, half burned. On the wall above her bed hung a single photograph, faded and curling, of 3 boys in sailor caps. You helped her sip. She took the spoon slowly, breath catching between swallows. They'll let me go soon, she murmured. No, you said. They wouldn't. She gave a dry laugh. I've seen what they do with broken tools. You stayed beside her as the light faded. She spoke little, only once reaching for your hand. You remember to rest, she said. Your hands matter, not just what they carry. You nodded. She squeezed your fingers, then released them. Later that night, after the supper trays had been cleared and the hallway mopped, you returned. The candle had guttered low. Her chest rose slowly, then not at all. You sat with her until the flame went out. The house didn't stop. The bells rang the next morning. The boots were polished. The sheets were scrubbed. But Agnes was gone. They didn't hold a funeral. No black cloths. No prayers. The butler said her name once, in passing, then crossed it off a list. Her replacement arrived the following day, young, strong, silent. You returned to the laundry room. The basin was empty. You placed a folded cloth on the bench where she used to sit. On it, the only thing of hers you had taken, a pressed collar, starched so stiff it still held her shape. You left it there, a crown no one would see. Her apron was folded neatly on the edge of her cot, the edges aligned, the ties tucked beneath. Nothing else remained. Not her brush, not the ragdoll she'd once sewn from dishcloth scraps, not even the cracked wooden comb she'd kept in the drawer with her hair ribbon. Only the apron and the emptiness. You stood in the doorway longer than you meant to. The light through the attic window was grey, muted by the overcast sky. Dust danced in it, slow and weightless. A stillness hung in the room, not silence, but absence. That peculiar hush, left behind by someone who would not return. The others didn't speak her name. Not at breakfast, not during chores, not in the linen corridor where her steps had once passed like clockwork. She's gone, someone muttered. That was all. No note, no explanation. Just, you swept the hallway with numb hands. The broom scratched along the stone floor, louder than usual. The world felt louder now, as though her silence had once muffled everything. In the scullery, the cook frowned. She's abandoned her post, she said. But you knew that wasn't it. Eliza hadn't run away. She had unraveled, quietly, for months. Piece by piece. You remembered the first morning she didn't lace her shoes. The day she forgot to starch the napkins. The time she left a kettle too long and scalded her hand. Small things. But you had seen them. The slow fading of a girl trying to vanish gently, without noise. She won't get far, the butler said over tea. Not with the roads like this. You hoped he was wrong. You hoped she was already miles away on a cart bound for the coast, or walking along a canal path where the hedgerows whispered her name instead of ignoring it. Later in the courtyard, you found something, a button. Black, round, simple, nestled in the gravel near the linden tree where she had once mended a hem by moonlight. You picked it up, turned it over in your palm. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't beautiful. But it was hers. You slipped it into your pocket. Inside, the chores stacked themselves like always. Floors to scrub, silver to polish, beds to turn. But Eliza's absence clung to the walls. Her cot sat untouched. Her footsteps echoed in memory, not in sound. You stood in the linen room just before dusk, folding towels by the wide wooden table. The house was quiet. Only the wind stirred through the broken window pane. You paused, holding a towel to your chest, and closed your eyes. You remembered the way she tucked her braid over one shoulder, the way she hummed under her breath when no one else could hear, the way her face went blank when the mistress raised her voice, but her hands still trembled. You opened your eyes, and something in you shifted, a slow, aching tug toward stillness. For months you had moved like a shadow, swift, small, obedient, but now you walked slower, not in defiance, not in fatigue, but in remembrance. That night, you held the button again beneath your blanket, pressed it into your palm until its round edges left marks on your skin. You didn't cry, but you did whisper her name, Eliza, just once, into the hush, into the darkness, so the house would not forget, so you wouldn't. The snow had fallen through the night like sifted flour from heaven, silent, unhurried, thick as a blessing no one dared ask for. When you woke, the world outside the attic window was white and blinding. The rooftops, the hedges, the worn stones of the servants' yard, all buried beneath a hush so complete it felt holy. You sat up slowly, unsure if you were dreaming. The air in the dormitory was colder than usual, the light oddly blue, as though the sun itself had softened. For a moment you heard nothing. No bells, no footsteps, no barking commands from the lower stairs, only quiet. You pulled on your boots and stepped into the corridor. The oil lamp flickered dimly. The coals in the scullery stove had long gone out. You expected Mrs. Hales's voice next, the usual bark echoing up the walls, but it didn't come. When you reached the front of the servants' wing, Harry stood there, already dressed, his cap in hand. He looked at you with wonder. "The doors are frozen shut," he said. You blinked. "They've tried them all, even the main ones. The snow's packed the handles, iced them like rock. The butler says we'll wait it out." You exhaled. Not a day off. Not exactly, but something near enough. The house was suspended, caught between action and stillness. The kind of pause that rarely came. No guests arriving, no coaches waiting, no errands to run. For once the house didn't need you, and so you moved differently. You lit a fire in the scullery, not because you were told, but because you wanted warmth. You placed the kindling carefully, watching the flame take hold, not with urgency, but with attention. It crackled softly, its heat gentle on your knuckles. You filled the kettle and brewed tea, not for the mistress, not for the butler, for yourself. You poured it into the chipped blue cup that Agnes had once favoured, the one with the faded gold rim and hairline crack near the handle. It held just enough. You sipped slowly, standing in the centre of the kitchen like you belonged. No one stopped you. You wrapped your shawl tighter and stepped into the drawing room, not to serve, but to look. The hearth was unlit, the chairs unoccupied, the curtains half drawn. You traced the edge of the mantel with your hand. The dust was untouched. It wouldn't be clean today. You walked through the still halls, past doors that usually remained closed. In one room, a fire laid but unlit. In another, a piano untouched, its keys dulled with time. In the library, you paused. The air smelled of parchment and polish. You ran your finger along the spine of a leather-bound book. The pages whispered when you opened them. Poems, delicate and frayed, words from a century before. You read 2 lines aloud before you stopped, afraid even of your own voice. By midday, the house had settled into a gentle kind of waiting. You returned to the kitchen, found a loaf of bread warming near the stove, and sliced a piece for yourself. You ate slowly, the butter cool and soft, melting into the crust. Harry sat beside you. "They don't know what to do," he said, grinning faintly. "Without the bells." You both laughed, a sound so rare it felt strange in your throat. The walls didn't echo it back. They simply absorbed it, like something long overdue. You ventured out to the courtyard. The snow lay deep, untouched, no footsteps, just a perfect sheet of white beneath a pewter sky. You walked across it, each step sinking with a satisfying crunch, leaving behind a trail like stitches in a blank cloth. At the far end of the garden, beneath the skeletal branches of the linden tree, you stood still. The air tasted clean, the kind of clean that doesn't last. Your breath misted before you, curling upward, vanishing. You closed your eyes. And for the first time in months, maybe years. You felt something in your chest that wasn't fatigue or fear or duty. You felt still, whole, present. The house could not claim this hour. It could not wring it away, polish it down, assign it. This hour was yours. You returned inside just before dusk, the doors still sealed, the staff still quiet. No one had left. No one had been dismissed. No bells had rung. In the scullery, the fire still burned. You knelt beside it and let its warmth touch your face. And in your apron pocket, the shard of porcelain, the one from the broken teacup, pressed against your hip, reminding you the world was still fragile. But today, you are not. Years have passed. You move more slowly now, but with the assurance of someone who knows the weight of footsteps. The house hasn't changed much, not in its bones. The floorboards still creak in the same places. The windows still rattle when the wind is sharp. The bells still hang in the corridor like relics of a past that never entirely faded. You still serve, but something in you is quieter now. Not broken, just steady. Still, each morning you tie your apron the same way, not firm against your spine. You sweep the same corridors, lay the same cutlery, light the same fires. But the fear that once sat curled in your ribs has grown still. You no longer flinch when your name is called, because now they know it. Not all of them, but enough. You keep small things close. Beneath your mattress, the 3 letters you never sent, now creased and yellowed. They are not meant for posting anymore. They are part of your ritual, a reminder that you once needed words to find yourself. In your apron pocket, folded in the lining, you still carry the black button Eliza left behind. You've rubbed it smooth over the years. Sometimes, when the halls are empty and the candle burns low, you hold it between your fingers, feeling its silence. You haven't seen her since. She never wrote. You never expected her to. Agnes's pressed collar lives in the drawer of the laundry room now, wrapped in soft muslin. The new laundress, young, quick, cheerful, doesn't know its story. She asked once why you keep it. You smiled and said it was just old linen. She didn't press further. Harry's no longer a boy. He grew taller, leaner, his voice dropped. He still works in the stables, but speaks with confidence now, his hands strong from lifting grain sacks and brushing horses. Last week he brought you a ribbon blue bright with stitched edges. For my sister, he said, but I thought you might keep it safe. You nodded and placed it in the drawer beside Agnes's collar. The upstairs rooms are still warm. The master is gone now, buried last spring, and the house passed to a nephew who visits less frequently. His wife rarely leaves London. Fewer guests come. Fewer orders ring through the walls. Sometimes you walk the halls in the early morning before the sun lifts its full weight over the moors. You pause by the linden tree in the garden. It still stands, though its bark is split with age. The bench beneath it is cracked, moss-covered. You sit anyway. You breathe. And in that breath is every fire you lit, every bed you turned, every silent apology you never spoke aloud. You have served this house longer than anyone remembers. But you remember. You remember the girl who burned her fingers on her first coal scuttle. The scullery steam that stole your voice and gave you something stronger. The boy in the pantry with a crust in his coat pocket. The woman who folded linen with hands that never stopped trembling. And the girl who folded her apron one final time, left without a word, and never looked back. You rise from the bench. There's supper to prepare. A hallway to sweep. You walk slower now, but the stillness walks with you. And as you pass through the scullery door, your hand brushes the lining of your apron. The button is still there, a small dark circle. Proof that you endured. Proof that you remembered. Proof that you were not just a servant. You were a witness. You were a story. And you still are. As the last ember fades in this long, quiet house, thank you for walking with me through the forgotten corridors of a servant's life. If this story stayed with you, I invite you to subscribe in return, whenever you wish, to the gentle hush of history. Which part of this journey will you carry with you into the silence of your own night? As the last candle burns low in the servants' hall, I hope this journey left something warm in your heart. If these forgotten lives spoke to you, subscribe to walk again through history's hushed corridors. Leave a comment. What part of this story stayed with you? Until next time, sleep deeply. You are remembered. Could you have endured a life like Eliza's? What part of this story stayed with you the most? Have you ever felt invisible in someone else's world?